"Don't touch my engine unless you actually know what you're looking at." Victoria Hayes said it loudly enough for the investors to hear, loudly enough for the cameras to catch, and loudly enough for the little girl standing beside the mechanic to tighten both hands around the straps of her backpack. The glass-walled launch hall of Hayes Automotive shimmered above downtown Detroit like a palace built for horsepower and money. Under the white spotlights sat the Hayes V12 Aurora, a midnight black hypercar worth more than most neighborhoods, its carbon fiber body low and perfect, its gold-trimmed engine bay open like a crown jewel on display. 6 minutes earlier, Victoria had walked onto the stage in a white blazer and told 300 guests that the Aurora would change American performance forever. 4 minutes earlier, she had pressed the ignition button with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. And 3 minutes earlier, the $3 million prototype engine had coughed once, shuddered twice, and died in front of a live online audience. Now there was no music, no applause, only the soft panic of expensive people pretending not to panic. Phones lowered. Reporters whispered. Men in tailored suits checked stock alerts beneath the glow of their screens. Somewhere behind the stage, an assistant kept saying, "We can cut the feed," but no one seemed brave enough to say it to Victoria's face. She stood beside the dead machine with her jaw set, beautiful, furious, and humiliated in the way powerful people hate most, publicly. "Bradley," she said without turning. "Tell me you have an answer." Bradley Knox, her chief performance engineer, stepped forward with a tablet in one hand and fear hidden behind a confident smile. "It's a minor ignition delay, Victoria. Probably a sensor conflict. Probably." Her eyes moved like steel. "You had 18 months. Bradley swallowed, then glanced toward the side entrance where a man in a faded denim work jacket had just walked in carrying a red metal toolbox. "We called local support as backup." Victoria followed his gaze and froze. Ethan Miller did not look like anyone who belonged under those lights. He was 38, lean. From long days on concrete floors, with oil set deep beneath his fingernails and a brown work shirt that had been washed too many times. Beside him stood his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, clutching a sketchbook against her chest. Her blonde hair was tucked unevenly behind one ear, and her sneakers lit up faintly with each nervous step across the polished floor. Ethan stopped 10 feet from the Aurora. He did not stare at the cameras. He did not stare at Victoria's diamond watch or the row of investors standing stiff along the velvet rope. He looked at the engine, quietly, carefully, the way a doctor might look at a patient who was trying to speak without words. Bradley hurried over, lowering his voice, but not enough. "This is Ethan Miller. Runs a garage outside Toledo. Good with old engines. We just need him to take a quick look while my team resets the system." A few people laughed. Not loudly, but enough. The kind of laughter that wears a suit and calls itself polite. Victoria looked Ethan up and down, then looked at his toolbox. "This is a $3 million powertrain," she said. "Not a lawnmower." Lily's cheeks flushed. Ethan's face did not change. He simply set the toolbox down with a soft metal click that somehow carried through the hall. "No, ma'am," he said. "It isn't." "Then don't touch my engine unless you actually know what you're looking at." Another ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. A camera operator shifted closer. Bradley smiled like a man relieved to have someone smaller to stand on. Lily moved closer to her father and whispered, "Daddy, we can go." Ethan looked down at her. There was no anger in his eyes. Only that old, steady grace of a man who had learned not every insult deserved the dignity of a fight. "We don't leave something broken just because someone speaks loudly," he said softly. Then he turned back to Victoria. "May I listen?" Victoria blinked. "Listen." "Yes, ma'am." Bradley gave a short laugh. The diagnostic suite already scanned it. "We have thermal imaging, pressure mapping, live ECU data, everything." Ethan nodded. "Then you have numbers." He looked at the silent Aurora. "I need the truth." Something in the room shifted just slightly. Not respect yet. Not belief. Only curiosity, thin as a match flame in a cold garage. Victoria folded her arms. "You have 7 minutes." Ethan crouched beside the open engine bay, not hurried, not impressed, not ashamed. From his toolbox, he took out an old mechanic's stethoscope, the rubber tubing worn smooth, the metal head dulled from years of use. Along the side, scratched by hand, was one name, Mara. Lily saw it and went still. Victoria saw it too, though she did not understand why the sight made Ethan's thumb pause over the letters for half a second. "You're going to fix my prototype with that?" she asked. Ethan placed the earpieces in, leaned close to the engine, and rested one hand gently on the carbon fiber frame. "No," he said. "I'm going to find out what it's been trying to tell you." The hall seemed to hold its breath. Outside the glass walls, Detroit traffic moved in silver lines beneath the evening sky. Inside, under $1 million of lighting, a poor single dad listened to a dead engine while the woman who owned it watched with doubt in her eyes. Then Ethan lifted his head and said the first words that made Bradley Knox stop smiling. "Your engine didn't fail." He looked directly at Victoria. It was forced out of rhythm. Bradley Knox stopped smiling for only a second, but Ethan saw it. Men who built their lives on control always revealed themselves in the smallest cracks. A blink held too long. A hand gripping a tablet too tightly. A breath taken before the lie arrived. "Forced out of rhythm," Bradley repeated, letting a laugh cover the sharp edge in his voice. "That is not a diagnosis, Mr. Miller. That is poetry." A few people chuckled again, but this time the sound was thinner. Victoria did not laugh. Her eyes stayed on Ethan, then moved to Bradley, then back to the silent engine. "Explain," she said. Ethan removed the stethoscope from his ears and stood slowly. The spotlights reflected off the Aurora's black bodywork, throwing pale lines across his worn jacket and the oil stains near his cuffs. In that room of glass, chrome, and polished confidence, he looked like a man carved from a different America, one made of roadside diners, cold mornings, unpaid bills, and fathers who kept going because small hands were counting on them. "Your ignition sequence is clean on paper," he said. "But the combustion timing is being corrected after the mistake, not before it. The engine is fighting its own instructions." Bradley stepped in quickly. "That is impossible. The control unit is adaptive." "Adaptive does not mean wise," Ethan said. Bradley's jaw tightened. Victoria tilted her head. The line landed quietly, but it landed. Behind the velvet rope, investors who had been checking their phones looked up. A reporter lowered her microphone, listening now instead of waiting for a failure to quote. Lily stood near the side curtain with her sketchbook pressed to her chest. Watching her father in that way children watch the person who holds their whole world together. She knew the set of his shoulders. She knew when he was tired. She knew when someone had hurt him and he was pretending they had not. This was not the garage back home, where the air smelled like gasoline, pine soap, and burned coffee. This was not the narrow office where Bill sat in a shoebox marked later, though later always came too soon. This was a room where one handbag could pay their mortgage for a year, and still people looked at her father like he was the smallest thing in it. Bradley turned toward Victoria. "With respect, we should clear the stage. My team can run a full reboot and move the demonstration indoors tomorrow." "This is indoors," Victoria said coldly. "You know what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean," she replied. Then she looked at Ethan. "Can it start tonight?" The question moved through the hall like a match struck in darkness. Ethan glanced once at the engine, then at the cable harness feeding into the rear bay, then at the tablet in Bradley's hand. "Yes." Bradley laughed too quickly. "That is reckless." So was starting it with a fuel map fighting cylinder 7. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy. A senior engineer in the second row, a gray-haired man named Walter Reed, straightened slightly, as if Ethan had named a ghost no one else had seen. Victoria noticed him. "Walter?" she asked. Walter cleared his throat. "Cylinder 7 did spike on the first attempt. We assumed it was a sensor echo." Bradley turned sharply. "Because it was." Ethan did not argue. He simply reached into his toolbox and took out a folded yellow notepad, the corners soft from use. He opened it to a page filled with hand-drawn timing arcs, pressure marks, and small notes written in careful pencil. Victoria stared at it, as though he had brought a candle to fix a satellite. "You wrote that just now?" she asked. "While listening. In under 2 minutes?" "Engines repeat themselves," Ethan said. "People are harder." Lily smiled a little at that. Not enough for anyone to notice, but enough for her father to feel it from across the room. Then a young assistant standing near Bradley leaned toward another technician and whispered, "This is ridiculous. He probably fixes minivans and lawn tractors." Lily heard it. Her smile disappeared. The assistant noticed her and gave a careless shrug, the kind adults give when they forget children remember everything. "No offense, sweetheart," he said. "This just is not your dad's world." The words reached Ethan. His hand paused over the notepad. For the first time that evening, something changed in his face. Not anger, not pride. Something quieter and more painful, like a man hearing a door close on his child. The room waited for him to snap, to defend himself, to make the scene they expected from a poor man in a rich room. He did not. He walked over to Lily, knelt on one knee, and picked up the sketchbook that had slipped from her hands. The drawing inside showed the aurora in bright blue pencil, with yellow flames coming from the exhaust, and a small stick figure beside it labeled Daddy. Ethan brushed an invisible speck from the page and handed it back to her. "Never let a loud room decide what your heart already knows," he said softly. Lily nodded, blinking fast. Victoria heard every word. Something in her expression shifted again, not into warmth yet, but away from certainty. Ethan rose and returned to the car. "I will need the stage fans off, the music feed killed, and every microphone within 10 feet of the engine unplugged." Bradley scoffed. "You cannot be serious." Ethan looked at Victoria, not Bradley. "If you want me to hear the problem, the room has to stop trying to impress itself." For the first time all night, Victoria Hayes did not answer immediately. The city lights glowed beyond the glass like 1,000 distant witnesses. Her company, her reputation, her pride, and perhaps something more fragile stood around that dead machine. Finally, she lifted one hand. "Turn it all off." One by one, the fans died. The music vanished. The soft electric hum faded from the stage. And in the sudden quiet, Ethan Miller leaned over the $3 million engine as if listening to a confession. The silence did not feel peaceful. It felt expensive. It settled over the launch hall and made every small sound confess itself. The soft click of a camera lens, the nervous swallow of an investor, the faint buzz of electricity behind the glass walls. Ethan Miller leaned over the Aurora's open engine bay with one hand braced against the carbon fiber frame and the old mechanic's stethoscope pressed lightly near the intake assembly. His eyes closed. Not for drama. Not for effect. He closed them the way a man closes a door against noise so truth can speak. Victoria Hayes stood 3 feet away, arms folded, her white blazer bright beneath the stage lights, her face unreadable. She had built a career out of reading boardrooms before anyone else did. She could sense weakness in a negotiation, hesitation in a partner, dishonesty in a polished report. But she did not know how to read this man. Ethan was not performing. That disturbed her more than if he had been arrogant. Bradley Knox shifted beside her. "Victoria, this is wasting valuable time." "Quiet," she said. Bradley blinked. "I am only saying that the live stream numbers are dropping, and the longer this goes on, the worse it looks." I said quiet. The words were calm, but everyone heard the door close. Ethan moved the stethoscope 2 inches lower, then tapped the engine housing once with the back of his finger. He listened. He waited. He tapped again, softer this time. Lily watched from near the side curtain, holding her sketchbook so tightly the paper bent under her fingers. She had seen her father do this in their garage with broken trucks, delivery vans, school buses, and once with a farmer's old combine that 3 dealerships had given up on. He would listen longer than other people thought necessary. He would ask the machine questions without speaking. Then he would find the one small thing everyone else had rushed past. At home, people called it patience. In this room, they were starting to wonder if it was something else. Walter Reed took one cautious step closer. "Mr. Miller," he said, voice low, respectful in a way no one else had been yet. "Are you hearing a delayed pressure return?" Ethan opened his eyes. "Not delayed. Corrected." Walter's brow tightened. "After the misfire?" "Before the computer admits there was one." The older engineer went still. Bradley snapped. "That is not how the Aurora system reports." Ethan looked at him. "No, that is how it hides." The sentence moved through the room like cold air under a locked door. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" Ethan wiped his thumb across a smudge of oil on the engine frame, then pointed toward the rear control module. "Your hybrid controller is trying to smooth the torque curve before ignition stabilizes. It is making the engine sound refined in simulation, but in real steel, under real fuel pressure, it is starving cylinder 7 for a fraction of a second. Then the correction overcompensates. The engine does not fail because it is weak. It shuts down because 2 systems are arguing and neither one is allowed to lose." Walter whispered, almost to himself. That would explain the double pulse. Bradley turned on him. Walter, do not validate guesswork. Walter did not look away from Ethan. It is not guesswork if he is right. Victoria stepped closer to the engine, the anger in her face now braided with attention. Can you prove it? Ethan nodded toward Bradley's tablet. Pull the raw ignition log. Not the executive summary. Not the filtered chart. The raw log from the first attempt. Bradley held the tablet against his side. That data is proprietary. Ethan gave him a quiet look. So is the truth, apparently. A few people in the crowd inhaled sharply. Not laughter this time. Not mockery. Recognition. The kind that arrives when a humble man says the one thing a powerful room has been avoiding. Victoria extended her hand toward Bradley. Give me the tablet. Bradley hesitated just long enough to become visible. That was his mistake. Victoria saw it. Walter saw it. Ethan saw it. Even Lily, who did not understand fuel maps or ignition timing, understood the look of a grown man trying to hide a broken window before someone noticed the glass. Bradley, Victoria said. Now. He handed it over. She unlocked the screen, then passed it to Walter. The older engineer moved through the files with practiced fingers. The hall remained still. Outside, a siren passed somewhere far below on the street, fading between the towers of Detroit. Inside, every face turned toward that little screen as if judgment itself might rise from it. Walter found the raw log. His mouth tightened. He zoomed in. Once. Twice. Then he looked up, not at Victoria, but at Ethan. There is a correction spike 20 milliseconds before shutdown. Bradley forced a laugh. 20 milliseconds is nothing. Ethan shook his head. At 8,000 revolutions per minute, 20 milliseconds is not nothing. It is a lifetime in the wrong place. Victoria took the tablet. Her eyes moved across numbers she understood well enough to know the room had changed. The failed start was no longer a mystery. It had a shape. It had a pattern. And worse, it had been missed by the people she trusted most. What do you need? She asked Ethan. Bradley's face paled. Ethan looked down at the engine again, then at Lily. She stood small and silent beneath lights made for billion-dollar dreams, but her eyes told him the only thing that mattered. She still believed in him. He turned back to Victoria. I need 10 minutes, a manual override cable, a quarter-inch driver, and someone brave enough to stop protecting the mistake. No one laughed. Not one person. The man they had mocked as a local garage mechanic had just named the wound inside the most expensive machine in the room, and for the first time that night, Victoria Hayes looked at him not as a problem to manage, but as the only man in the building who might know how to bring her dream back to life. Victoria Hayes did not like needing anyone. She had built her company by moving faster than doubt, sharper than excuses, and colder than anyone who mistook kindness for weakness. Yet as she stood beside the dead Aurora with Bradley Knox watching her like a man trying to steer a storm, she understood something that made her stomach tighten. The poor mechanic in the faded denim jacket was no longer asking for permission to touch her engine. He was asking whether she had the courage to hear what her own people had missed. Get him what he asked for, Victoria said. Bradley stepped closer, lowering his voice. Victoria, please think about this. We are in front of investors, media, and a live audience. If he makes one wrong adjustment, the demonstration is finished. Ethan looked up from the engine bay. The demonstration is already finished if everyone keeps pretending pride is a repair strategy. No one moved for half a breath. It was not said loudly. That was what made it cut deeper. Walter Reed turned to a junior technician. Manual override cable, quarter-inch driver, insulated probe, and the raw access port key. The young technician glanced at Bradley first. That glance told Victoria more than she wanted to know. Bradley had trained the room to seek permission before seeking truth. Do it, Victoria said. The technician hurried away. Ethan returned to the engine, but Lily remained near the curtain, small beneath the tall black speakers and the blue-white glow of the presentation screens. Her sketchbook was tucked under her arm now, the page with the Aurora pressed safely inside. She tried to stand still, the way her father had taught her when adults were tense, but her eyes kept moving from Bradley to Victoria to the reporters whispering behind the velvet rope. One woman in a navy dress glanced at Lily and whispered, "Poor thing. This must be embarrassing." Lily heard it. She lowered her eyes. Ethan heard it too. He did not turn around. He tightened his hand once on the edge of the engine bay, then released it. Grace is not weakness. Dignity is not. Silence because you have nothing to say. Sometimes dignity is choosing the one person in the room who matters most and refusing to let cruelty become the language she remembers. The technician returned and placed the tools on a rolling cart beside Ethan. Bradley immediately reached for the override cable. Ethan stopped him with one quiet word. Please. Bradley froze. Ethan did not glare. He did not accuse. He simply held out his hand. Bradley surrendered the cable with a smile so stiff it looked borrowed. You know, Bradley said, turning slightly toward the crowd, there is a reason people with certifications handle prototype systems. A modern hypercar is not some rusted pickup in a gravel lot. A few guests smiled, unsure if they were allowed to laugh. Ethan connected the cable to the access port near the rear control module. Rusted pickups teach you humility, he said. They do not care what school you went to. Walter coughed softly, almost hiding a smile. Victoria noticed. She also noticed Bradley's tablet, still open on the diagnostic file, where the raw ignition log remained visible like a witness unwilling to leave. What exactly are you changing? She asked. Ethan rested the quarter-inch driver beside the fuel rail and pointed without touching. Nothing permanent. I am isolating the hybrid controller from the ignition correction loop for one start cycle. If the engine stabilizes, then your hardware is sound and your map is wrong. Bradley cut in. And if it does not stabilize? Ethan looked at him. Then I will be wrong in front of everyone. That does not seem to bother you. Being wrong is not shameful, Ethan said. Hiding it is. The room went still again. Victoria felt the words land somewhere uncomfortably close to her own chest. For years, she had believed respect was something people earned after proving they were useful. She had rewarded brilliance, punished weakness, and called it leadership. But now a man she had mocked in front of his child was standing beside her most valuable machine, calmly risking his pride because a mistake needed daylight. Lily stepped forward a few inches. Daddy. Ethan turned immediately. Not halfway. Not. Distracted. Fully. As if the cameras, the investors, the billion-dollar company, and the dead engine all became smaller than his daughter's voice. Yes, sweetheart. She swallowed. Are they going to blame you if it does not work? The question was so honest that it stripped the shine from the room. Victoria looked away first. Bradley did not. Ethan walked to Lily and crouched before her, lowering himself until they were eye to eye. Maybe, he said gently, but we do not let fear decide whether we help. Even when people are mean. Especially then, he said. That is when character has to do its work. Lily nodded, though her eyes were wet. Ethan brushed his thumb lightly over the edge of her sketchbook. And whatever happens, you and I are going home the same way we came in. Together? Together. He stood and returned to the Aurora. Victoria watched him, and for the first time that night, the word mechanic felt too small. Not because the work was small, but because the man inside it was larger than the room had allowed him to be. Walter leaned over the console. Override cable is live. Raw access enabled. Ethan nodded. Stage power stays stable. No music. No fans. No applause if it catches. Let the engine settle for 5 seconds before anyone celebrates. Bradley scoffed under his breath. If it catches. Ethan placed the stethoscope around his neck, then adjusted one connector by a fraction of an inch. The movement was so small most people missed it. Walter did not. Pulse balance spacing, Walter whispered. Ethan paused. His eyes lifted slowly. That phrase did not belong in this room unless someone knew where it came from. Walter stared at him, searching an old memory behind the lines of Ethan's face. Miller, he said carefully. Did you ever work on the Ashford prototype? The question changed the air. Bradley looked sharply at Walter. Victoria turned. Ethan did not answer right away. He looked down at the name scratched into the old stethoscope, Mara, and for a moment the cold launch hall seemed to fade into something softer, a hospital room, a promise, a life interrupted before the world ever learned what he had built. Then he closed the toolbox drawer with a quiet click. A long time ago, he said. Walter's face went pale with recognition. Dear Lord, he murmured. You are that Ethan Miller. Walter Reed said the words softly, but they seemed to travel farther than the microphones ever could. You are that Ethan Miller. The launch hall did not understand at first. The investors only heard a name. The reporters only sensed a story. Victoria Hayes heard enough to know that something had just moved beneath the polished floor of her company, something old, buried, and suddenly alive. Ethan kept his hand on the Aurora's engine frame, his eyes lowered, as if recognition were heavier than ridicule had been. Bradley Knox forced a small laugh. Walter, this is not the time for ghost stories from the engineering archives. Walter did not look at him. He looked only at Ethan, with the stunned respect of a man who had opened a forgotten door and found a piece of history standing there in work boots. The Ashford prototype, Walter said. 2011. A closed test facility outside Ann Arbor. Pulse balance ignition. Nobody could stabilize high-output combustion under hybrid torque correction until one young engineer solved it on a legal pad during a snowstorm. Victoria's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Bradley stepped in quickly. A discontinued project. Irrelevant. Walter turned to her then, and his voice gained strength. Not irrelevant. The Aurora's entire ignition philosophy traces back to that research family. We bought the rights years ago through a technology holding company. Victoria looked at Ethan. You worked on that system? Ethan gave a small nod. For a while. For a while. Walter repeated, almost wounded by the humility. You wrote the original pulse spacing model. A murmur broke across the room. Phones rose again, but this time not to capture embarrassment. They rose because the room smelled revelation. Ethan removed the override cable from its case and laid it beside the intake assembly with careful hands. It was a long time ago, he said. People move on. Walter shook his head. No, people do not move on from work like that. They build companies on it. Victoria felt the sentence settle into her chest. Build companies on it. She had stood on stages in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago talking about innovation, inheritance, and the American future of performance. She had praised her teams, her brand, her vision, but she had never once spoken the name Ethan Miller. Until this evening, she had not known there was a name to speak. Bradley moved closer to her, voice low and urgent. Victoria, please. This is becoming a distraction. The press will twist it. Let us get him off the stage, restart the communications plan, and handle the technical review privately. Ethan did not react. That bothered Bradley most. A guilty man argues too much. An honest man often lets truth do its walking. Lily stood at the side of the stage, watching adults rearrange their faces around her father. Only 10 minutes ago, they had treated him like a mistake in the room. Now they looked at him like a hidden key. She did not understand patents or corporate acquisitions, but she understood the quiet ache in his shoulders. She had seen it every year on her mother's birthday, when Ethan would sit at the kitchen table after she went to bed, holding that same old stethoscope with Mara's name scratched into the side. Victoria stepped closer. Her voice softened, not enough to be gentle, but enough to be human. Why did you leave? Ethan's fingers paused over the quarter-inch driver. For a moment, all the lights, glass, money, and cameras seemed to fall away. My wife got sick, he said. The room quieted. Mara. She needed treatments in Cleveland. I needed insurance, time, and work that did not ask me to sleep in a test lab 4 nights a week. He looked briefly at Lily. Then she passed, and I had a little girl who needed breakfast, clean clothes, bedtime stories, and a father who came home when he said he would. No one spoke, not even Bradley. There are truths that do not need decoration. They stand alone, and every proud thing around them grows smaller. Ethan looked back at the engine. I sold what I could. Signed what they put in front of me. I thought I was buying time. Walter's voice lowered. They took your name off the research. Ethan gave the faintest smile, but it carried no bitterness. Names are heavy. Back then, I was carrying enough. Victoria looked down at the tablet in her hand, at the elegant Hayes interface wrapped around numbers born from a man she had insulted in front of his child. A strange shame entered her, unfamiliar and unwelcome. She had thought he was beneath the machine. Now she was beginning to understand that the machine might be standing on his shoulders. Bradley cleared his throat. With sympathy for Mr. Miller's personal history, none of this changes the fact that unauthorized adjustment of this prototype is an unacceptable risk. Walter faced him. Unauthorized? Bradley, the system is echoing his own architecture. Modified architecture, Bradley snapped. Improved architecture. Ethan looked at the raw data screen. Then why is your improvement choking cylinder 7? Bradley's face tightened. It was small, barely a shadow, but Victoria saw it. Ethan saw it too. So did Walter. Lily did not know what cylinder 7 meant, but she knew when a room stopped breathing. Victoria turned to Bradley. Did your team alter the fuel map after final certification? We optimized it. After certification? We adjusted for presentation conditions. After certification? She repeated. Bradley's polished confidence began to thin. The original map produced a rougher start under cold stage airflow. It was not elegant enough for launch. Ethan's voice was quiet. So you made it sound expensive instead of letting it run honest. The words struck harder than accusation. Walter closed his eyes, as if the whole failure had just assembled itself in front of him. Victoria looked at the Aurora, then at the crowd, then at Lily, whose small face still carried the sting of every careless joke spoken that night. Something in Victoria's posture changed. Her pride did not disappear. Pride rarely dies that quickly, but it bent, just enough for truth to pass over it. Can you undo it? She asked. Ethan picked up the override cable. For one start cycle, yes. Bradley stepped forward. Victoria, I strongly advise against this. She did not look at him. Your advice put us here. The room went silent. Ethan connected the cable. Walter moved to the console. Lily took one step closer to the stage, her sketchbook held against her heart like a prayer. Victoria looked at Ethan Miller, the man whose work had been buried, whose grief had been private, whose dignity had survived the laughter of strangers, and for the first time she spoke to him without command in her voice. Mr. Miller, she said, bring it back if you can. Ethan rested his hand lightly against the engine, listening once more to the quiet metal beneath the lights. Not if I can, he said, if it wants to tell the truth. Ethan Miller did not rush after Victoria gave him permission. That was the first thing the room noticed. A desperate man would have moved quickly, trying to prove he belonged before someone changed their mind. Ethan moved like a man who understood that some repairs failed not from lack of speed, but from lack of reverence. He slid the manual override cable into the access port until it clicked, then rested 2 fingers on the engine frame and waited. Walter Reed stood at the console with the raw log open, his gray brows drawn tight in concentration. Victoria stood on the other side of the Aurora, close enough to see the tiny scratches along Ethan's old stethoscope, close enough to see that his hands were steady. Bradley Knox hovered near the rear display, his expression carefully arranged, but the sweat along his temple betrayed him beneath the cool blue lights. Manual loop is open, Walter said. Hybrid controller isolated for 1 start cycle. Ethan nodded. Fuel pressure? 3,100 pounds per square inch and holding. Stage battery? 92%. Cylinder 7 correction? Walter looked at the screen. Still cute. Ethan reached into the bay with the 1/4-inch driver and made a small adjustment near the ignition control bridge. Not dramatic. Not flashy. A turn so slight that most of the audience would not have noticed if every eye in the room had not been fixed on him. Check it now. Walter's fingers moved. His face changed. Correction cleared. A whisper went through the crowd, soft and uncertain. Ethan did not smile. Do not celebrate a door because it opens, he said. Wait until you know what is on the other side. Victoria heard the sentence and felt it brush against more than the engine. Her whole life had been built on doors opening, boardroom doors, executive doors, doors marked private, doors that moved because her last name carried weight. She had mistaken access for wisdom more times than she cared to count. Ethan, somehow, had spent a lifetime outside those doors and still carried more quiet authority than half the people inside them. Bradley stepped toward Walter. Let me review that adjustment. Walter did not move aside. No, Bradley's eyes flashed. Excuse me. No, Walter said again, stronger this time. You had your review. The room caught the change. It was not rebellion. It was redemption arriving late, but standing upright. Bradley lowered his voice. Walter, do not forget who signs off on your department. Walter looked at him with tired eyes. I did forget something tonight. I forgot that engineering is supposed to serve truth before title. Victoria turned slowly toward Bradley. Did you pressure the team to hide the rough start warnings? Bradley's mouth opened, then closed. I asked them to prioritize presentation stability. That is not what I asked. Victoria, every launch has refinements. Ethan looked at the display. Refinements do not erase raw flags. Bradley turned on him, the polished mask finally cracking. You do not know what it takes to run a company at this level. You hear one engine cough and think you understand pressure. Ethan met his eyes calmly. Pressure is telling your daughter there is enough money for groceries when you know the bank account says otherwise. Pressure is fixing a transmission at midnight because a nurse needs her car before a morning shift. Pressure is sitting beside a hospital bed and choosing hope when hope is the only thing left in the room. This is not pressure. This is pride wearing a nice suit. No one laughed. No one even moved. Lily looked at her father with wide eyes. Not because he had raised his voice, he had not, but because he had let a small piece of their life enter that shining room, and somehow it made the marble floor seem less important. Victoria looked away first, not in dismissal, but because shame sometimes needs somewhere private to land. Bradley's face hardened. You are risking an $18 million vehicle. Ethan looked back at the engine. No, I am respecting it enough to stop lying to it. Walter leaned closer to the console. Start sequence can be armed. Victoria inhaled slowly. The air smelled faintly of warm carbon fiber, electrical insulation, and the expensive floral arrangements beginning to wilt under the heat of the lights. Beyond the glass walls, the city moved on, unaware that inside this room a woman was being asked to choose between the man who protected her image and the man who protected her truth. Arm it, she said. Walter pressed the command. The Aurora's dashboard awakened in a wave of pale blue light. The headlamps glowed like watchful eyes. A low electrical hum passed through the floor, not loud, just enough to make the champagne flutes tremble on their trays. Lily took a step forward, then stopped. Ethan noticed without turning. It is all right, sweetheart, he said. Stay behind the line. Okay, Daddy. Her voice was small, but it carried. Victoria glanced at the little girl and saw the whole evening differently for one painful second. She had not mocked a mechanic alone. She had mocked a father in front of the child who believed in him. That realization did not shout. It sat down in her heart and refused to leave. Walter looked at Ethan. Ready on your mark. Bradley spoke one last time, quieter now, almost pleading. Victoria, if this fails, the board will ask why you let a local mechanic override a certified prototype. Victoria kept her eyes on Ethan. If this fails, I will answer them. Ethan placed the stethoscope against the engine one final time. The room waited. 1 second. 2. 3. He heard the fuel rail settle. He heard the controller hold still instead of interfering. He heard cylinder 7 waiting, not wounded now, just cautious. Then he removed the stethoscope, set it gently on the cart, and stepped back. Now, he said. Victoria lifted her hand toward the ignition control, but stopped. Something, in her pride, gave way to something better. She looked at Ethan. You start it. Ethan shook his head. It is your car. No, Victoria said, her voice low enough that only those closest heard the grace trying to form inside it. Tonight, it is your truth. Ethan held her gaze for a moment. Then he pressed the ignition. The ignition button gave beneath Ethan Miller's thumb with a soft, almost humble click. For one breath, nothing happened. The hall stayed frozen in that white-blue glow, 300 people staring at a machine that had already embarrassed the most powerful woman in the room and the quiet father she had almost dismissed. Lily held both hands over her sketchbook. Walter Reed watched the raw log as if he were watching a heartbeat return on a hospital monitor. Bradley Knox stood near the rear display with his mouth pressed flat, caught between fear and disbelief. Then the Aurora inhaled. It was not a roar at first. It was a low turn deep inside the engine, a buried rotation, a slow awakening of metal, fuel, timing, and truth. The floor trembled beneath the stage. Champagne rippled in crystal glasses. A reporter whispered, "Oh my goodness," and forgot she was still recording. Ethan did not move. His hand left the ignition and rested at his side, calm and steady, as the V12 caught its rhythm one cylinder at a time. 1, 2, 3. The sound grew fuller, smoother, stronger, not wild, not angry, but disciplined, like thunder learning grace. The engine that had died under pride now lived under patience. It rolled through the glass hall in a deep American growl, rich and even, vibrating in the ribs of every person who had laughed only minutes before. No music could have matched it. No speech could have repaired what that sound repaired. Victoria Hayes stood completely still. The lights reflected in her eyes, but for the first time all night, she did not look like a woman controlling a room. She looked like someone being taught by it. The Aurora idled perfectly, each pulse balanced, each correction clean, each note steady enough to make Walter exhale with both hands on the console. Stable, he said, his voice breaking around the word. Cylinder. 7 is stable. Fuel pressure holding. No correction spike. No shutdown flag. He looked up at Ethan with something close to awe. You did it. Ethan listened for another second before answering. No, he said quietly. It was always capable. Someone just needed to stop making it pretend. That sentence traveled farther than the engine's sound. It found Victoria first, then Walter, then the engineers who had lowered their eyes when Bradley spoke over them for months, then Lily, who did not understand all the words but understood the feeling behind them. She knew what it meant to pretend things were fine because adults were tired. She knew what it meant when her father smiled through worry, when he fixed other people's cars while their own refrigerator hummed half empty, when he tucked her in and told her tomorrow would be better with a voice gentle enough to hide the math. Bradley stepped forward, clapping once, too loudly, trying to reclaim the room before it decided without him. Excellent. Good. That confirms my team's theory. The external override allowed the system to clear a temporary conflict. We can take it from here. Nobody joined him. The engine kept idling, powerful and honest. Walter turned slowly from the console. Your team's theory? Bradley lifted his chin. Walter, not now. No, Walter said. Now is exactly when truth belongs. Victoria looked at Bradley, and this time there was no confusion left in her expression. Only calculation, disappointment, and something sharper than both. Explain yourself, she said. Bradley glanced toward the crowd, toward the cameras, toward the investors who now watched him the way people watch a closed door after hearing something fall behind it. Victoria, I was managing a high-pressure launch. Every executive in this country knows adjustments happen before public demonstrations. Ethan stepped back from the Aurora and picked up his old stethoscope, wiping the metal head with a clean cloth from his toolbox. Adjustments happen, he said. Cover stories do not have to. Bradley's face tightened. You are enjoying this. Ethan looked at him, and there was no victory in his eyes. That was what made Bradley seem smaller. No, Ethan said. I have had enough humiliation in my life to know it should never be entertainment. The room softened around that. Even the reporters lowered their phones a few inches, as if some things deserved to be witnessed without hunger. Victoria turned to Walter. Show me the log. Walter connected the console feed to the main screen behind the stage. The grand promotional image of the Aurora faded away, replaced by raw ignition data, timestamps, correction loops, and the cold, undeniable evidence of what had been hidden. Walter pointed with one steady finger. Final certification map. Stable. Post-certification presentation map. Altered. Here is the correction spike. Here is the shutdown flag. Here is the override Mr. Miller used to isolate the false smoothing command. Victoria's voice dropped. Who approved the post-certification map? Walter did not answer. He did not need to. Bradley's name appeared in the access record, bright and plain on the massive screen. A sound moved through the room, not a gasp exactly, but the collective breath of people watching arrogance lose its hiding place. Bradley stared at his own name as though the screen had betrayed him. It was an aesthetic choice, he said. The board wanted the launch start to sound seamless. Ethan glanced at the still idling car. Weakness. Something better. Humility. The Aurora continued to breathe behind them, alive under the lights, while the whole hall stood in the kind of silence that does not come from failure, but from the sudden arrival of respect. The Aurora kept running, but the room had stopped moving. Its deep, steady idle filled the glass hall like a living confession, each pulse reminding everyone that the truth had not arrived with shouting, status, or polished credentials. It had arrived in the hands of a single father who still had motor oil on his sleeves and kindness in his voice after being mocked in front of his child. Victoria Hayes looked at the giant screen where Bradley Knox's name sat beside the altered map file, clean and undeniable. For a moment, she said nothing. That silence frightened Bradley more than anger would have. Victoria, he began, stepping toward her with both hands raised in a careful, executive kind of surrender. This needs context. She did not look at him. Then give it. Bradley glanced at the investors, the reporters, the engineers, the employees who had spent years applauding him because his office sat close to hers. Attribution was already removed from the package. I was not senior enough then to challenge it. But I saw the internal notes. I saw the initials. E.M. Victoria looked at Ethan. The initials seemed to echo louder than the engine. Why was I never told? Walter's voice grew quieter. Because no one wanted a billion-dollar platform tied to a man who had been bought out for medical bills. The words struck the room with a force no engine could match. Not violent, not loud, just morally final. Lily looked up at her father, confused and hurt in that innocent way children have when they learn adults can build beautiful things on unfair ground. Ethan placed one hand gently on her shoulder. "It is all right," he murmured. But Victoria heard him, and for the first time she understood that his calm was not permission. His grace had never meant the wrong was small. It meant he had refused to become small with it. A reporter near the front lifted her microphone. "Miss Hayes, are you confirming that Hayes Automotive's flagship technology originated from Mr. Miller's work?" Victoria looked at the woman, then at the crowd, then at the running Aurora. A public relations director near the wall shook her head quickly, eyes wide, begging her not to answer without preparation. Bradley whispered, "Do not say anything. Legal needs to handle this." Victoria stared at him. Legal did not build this engine. Bradley swallowed. Neither did he. Not alone. Ethan looked down, almost weary. No one builds anything alone. That sentence carried no bitterness, and somehow that made it more devastating. Victoria stepped onto the stage platform where, less than an hour earlier, she had promised the future. The cameras turned with her. The live stream, once nearly cut, now surged with viewers as clips spread across phones across the country. She stood in front of the Aurora, not beside Bradley, not above Ethan, but between the machine and the people who had come to worship it. "My name is Victoria Hayes," she said, her voice clear enough to reach the last row without help. "Tonight, I mocked a man I had not taken the time to know. I judged his clothes, his occupation, and his quietness, and I did it in front of his daughter." Lily lowered her eyes. Ethan's hand remained on her shoulder. Victoria continued. "That was not leadership. That was arrogance." The room held its breath. She turned slightly toward Ethan. "Mr. Miller, I also now have reason to believe that core technology used in this company's performance platform traces back to your work. If that is confirmed, Hayes Automotive will correct the record publicly, legally, and financially." Bradley stepped forward. "Victoria, stop." She turned to him, and this time her voice became ice. "You are suspended effective immediately pending a full independent review." The words did not need drama. Security did not need to rush. Bradley simply stood there as the world he had polished around himself lost its shine. His authority had depended on people being afraid to speak. That fear was leaving the room one honest breath at a time. Walter removed his badge from his pocket and held it tightly, as though expecting punishment too. Victoria looked at him. "Walter, you will lead the technical review with outside oversight." Walter blinked. "Me? You chose truth when it cost you something. That qualifies you more than silence ever qualified anyone else." For the first time that night, applause began, but it was uncertain, then stronger, then full. Ethan did not clap. He did not smile for the cameras. He crouched beside Lily, who was still staring at Victoria with a child's careful suspicion. Victoria stepped down from the platform and approached them slowly, leaving space, leaving dignity. She looked at Ethan first, then lowered her gaze to Lily. "I owe your father an apology," she said. "But I owe you one too." Lily hugged her sketchbook tighter. "Because you were mean to him?" The question was simple enough to make several adults look at the floor. Victoria nodded. "Yes, because I was mean to him. And because I made the mistake of thinking important people always look important when they walk into a room." Lily looked at her father. Ethan gave the smallest nod, not telling her what to feel, only letting her know she was safe. Victoria turned back to Ethan. "I am sorry," she said. "Not because you fixed my car. Because I should have respected you before I knew you could." The Aurora idled behind them, steady and warm, but the true thunder in the room was gone now. In its place was something quieter, something harder to fake. Respect. Victoria Hayes stood before Ethan Miller and his daughter with the Aurora still breathing behind her, and for the first time all night, there was no performance left in the room. The applause had faded into a reverent quiet. The reporters were still recording, the investors were still watching, and the city lights beyond the glass walls still glittered over Detroit, but the moment no longer belonged to money or machinery. It belonged to a father who had carried grief without letting it harden him, and to a little girl who had watched the world laugh at him before learning what she had known all along. Ethan did not answer Victoria's apology right away. He looked at her with tired eyes, not cruel, not triumphant, only honest. Thank you, he said. 2 simple words. No speech. No punishment. No victory lap. That almost made Victoria feel worse, because forgiveness given quietly can reveal more than anger ever could. Lily tugged at Ethan's sleeve. Daddy, does this mean everybody knows now? Ethan looked down at her. Knows what, sweetheart? She lifted her sketchbook, opened it to the drawing of the aurora, and touched the little figure she had labeled Daddy. That you can hear things other people miss. A gentle sound moved through the crowd, not laughter this time, but tenderness. Ethan crouched beside her. Maybe, he said, but hearing is not special if you stop listening to people. Lily thought about that, then looked at Victoria. Are you going to listen now? Victoria knelt carefully, not caring that her white pants touched the polished floor. It was a small act, but in that room, from that woman, it mattered. Yes, she said. I am. Lily studied her face with the solemn judgment only children can carry. Then she nodded once and handed Victoria the drawing. You can keep this if you remember. Victoria took the page as if it were more valuable than the car behind her. In the drawing, the aurora was blue instead of black, brighter than the real one, with yellow flames and stars above the windshield. Underneath, in uneven pencil, Lily had written, My daddy heard what nobody else could. Victoria's eyes shone, but she kept her voice steady. I will frame it in the engineering center, she said. Not in my office. In the place where people build things, so they remember why truth matters. Walter Reed stepped closer, wiping at his glasses with a handkerchief even though they were already clean. Ethan, he said, there are archives. Old emails. Lab notes. I can help verify the work. It may take time, but your name can be restored. Ethan looked toward the engine, then toward the old stethoscope resting in his toolbox with Mara's name scratched into it. For a moment, his face carried all the years between who he had been and who life had asked him to become. My name was never the part one missed most, he said. Victoria understood before he finished. Your wife. Ethan nodded. She believed that work could help people. Cleaner engines. Better efficiency. Less waste. She used to say if a machine had power, it also had responsibility. The room stayed quiet. No one checked a phone. No one whispered. Even the aurora seemed to idle more softly, as though the machine itself had entered the prayer of memory. Victoria looked at the drawing in her hands. Then we will restore more than your name. Ethan's brow tightened slightly. What does that mean? She stood and turned toward the cameras, but she did not speak like a chief executive officer selling a dream. She spoke like a person finally telling the truth inside one. Hayes Automotive will establish the Mara Miller Engineering Scholarship for children of working families who want to build, repair, design, and learn. We will fund it publicly, permanently, and transparently. And Mr. Miller will have full recognition and compensation for any confirmed contribution connected to our platform. The room absorbed the words slowly. Lily looked up at her father. Mommy gets a scholarship? Ethan's throat moved before his voice came. In her name, yes. So people will say her name? Yes, sweetheart. Lily smiled, and that small smile did what the engine could not. It broke him. Not loudly. Not completely. Just enough for Ethan Miller to close his eyes and place one hand over the stethoscope that had carried Mara's memory through every garage, every unpaid bill, every lonely night, and every morning he still got up because Lily needed him to. Victoria stepped closer, lowering her voice so the cameras could not turn it into theater. I would also like you to advise our engineering division. On your terms. Part-time if you want. From your garage if that is what your life requires. No one will ask you to become someone else to be respected here. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Lily. What do you think? Lily hugged his arm. Can we still keep the garage? Victoria answered before Ethan could. Yes, the garage will be safe. Ethan turned back to her, surprised. Victoria continued. I had my finance team check, while Walter reviewed the logs. Your building note is held by a regional bank partner of ours. Tomorrow morning, Hayes Automotive will purchase the note and convert the property into a community technical training site, with you as owner and director if you accept. Young people can learn there. Real skills. Real work. No velvet ropes. Ethan stared at her, and for the first time all night, he looked shaken. Not by humiliation. Not by praise. By the weight of a second chance large enough to hold his daughter's future. Miss Hayes, he said softly, I do not want charity. It is not charity, Victoria said. It is restitution with respect. Walter nodded. And it is overdue. Ethan looked around the room, at the engineers who now stood a little straighter, at the reporters who had stopped hunting for scandal and started witnessing grace, at Bradley's empty place near the display where Pride had stood only minutes before. Then he looked at Lily's drawing in Victoria's hands. Then we do it right, he said. No hiding mistakes. No stealing names. No teaching kids that being loud makes them strong. Victoria nodded. Agreed. Ethan picked up his toolbox, old and dented, the same one everyone had judged when he entered. Lily took his free hand. Together, they walked past the Aurora, past the cameras, past the investors who now stepped aside not because he was rich, not because he was famous, but because respect had finally learned his shape. Near the exit, Victoria called after him. Mr. Miller. Ethan turned. The engine hummed behind her, alive and steady. She held up Lily's drawing. What should we call the training center? Ethan glanced at his daughter. Lily whispered something. He smiled. Call it the quiet work garage. Victoria repeated the name softly, and the room seemed to understand. Because that was what had saved the night. Not noise. Not ego. Not power polished under spotlights. Quiet work. Quiet dignity. Quiet grace. Ethan nodded once, then walked into the Detroit night with his daughter beside him. The same man who had entered through the side door, yet somehow larger than every shining thing he left behind. And inside the glass hall, no one spoke for a long while. The Aurora kept running, but the real sound everyone remembered was the silence that followed when a room full of powerful people finally learned what respect was supposed to sound like.